Hi, this is Kevin with Crossing Out the I, and today we're going to talk about the two levels of solidarity. Within Catholic social teaching, there exists what is known as the principle of solidarity, which, according to the Compendium of the Social Doctrine of the Church, quote, highlights in a particular way the intrinsic social nature of the human person, the equality of all in dignity and rights, and the common path of the individuals and peoples towards an ever more committed unity. End quote. This principle, ultimately, is rooted in the very first chapter of the very first book of Scripture, which says, quote, Then God said, Let us make human beings in our image, after our likeness. End quote. Every man and every woman is made in the image and likeness of God, and just as we have a duty to love God with all of our being, so too do we have a duty, or to use more technical language, an obligation to each other. This is enshrined in the great words of Jesus when he was asked which commandment of the Jews was the greatest. In Matthew 22, verse 37, he says, quote, You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. End quote. And then in verse 39, he says, quote, You shall love your neighbor as yourself. End quote. These are the scriptural foundations upon which the principle of solidarity rests. We are all children of God. Therefore, the compendium makes a distinction between the moral virtue, that is solidarity, and the social principle, that it is. Solidarity can claim to be a moral virtue since, according to the compendium, quote, it rises to the rank of fundamental social virtue since it places itself in the sphere of justice. It is a virtue directed par excellence to the common good. End quote. Solidarity, as a moral virtue, is not simply a feeling of goodwill, as one might experience feelings of that towards the victims of a catastrophe or a moral injustice, although those feelings are certainly good. Rather, it is the recognition that, as the compendium says on page 86, every man and every woman is indebted to the society within which he or she lives, and therefore has a responsibility to pay back that debt by, as the common phrase goes, paying it forward, helping those who are in need within that same society. Therefore, it is a very personal virtue. However, as mentioned, solidarity is also a social principle. The compendium frames this as the fight against what are termed structures of sin. What is a structure of sin? Any structure has to have a root, a foundation, and, as the name would imply, a structure of sin is rooted in sin. We can take 3 examples. The slave trade, with all of the economic ramifications that would result in its being fought for, the laws that were made in order to facilitate the trading of men and women, and the public who, their moral senses deadened, bought into these ideas and helped support them, was the structure of sin. Take again the abortion trade in the modern day, which trades human lives for convenience. The laws that made it legal, the extraneous groups that fought for its legality and supported at the ground level, and the way that it has worked its way into our economic system, especially as a means for a woman not to quote-unquote sacrifice her career for the sake of another person. Another structure of sin. Finally, we can look at the pornography industry. This one is much more of a socially grounded structure, as there are few laws that regulate it, given what kind of subject it is, and yet the unofficial policymakers, such as Google, Microsoft, and Apple, have all made exceptions for it as something that they will allow. And the results are objectification of women and men, and the slavery of men and women to the sensual pleasures, unable to stop even when they desperately want to. Another structure of sin. The Church, through her compendium, calls on all of us to transform our society by eliminating those structures of sin through, and I quote, the creation or appropriate modification of laws, market regulations, and judicial systems, end quote, Although, to that list, one could perhaps add the destruction of some of these truly wicked structures. Then can societies as a whole begin to flourish outside, as much as possible anyway, of the shadows of sin. Thank you all so much for listening. Have a wonderful day. Goodbye.